Ravi lived in a quiet town where everyone knew each other. He had worked hard for many years to buy a small piece of land at the edge of the neighborhood. On that land, he built a modest home with his own hands. It was not fancy, but it was strong, peaceful, and full of memories. The wide yard gave him space to plant trees, grow vegetables, and keep his 2 dogs who loved to run around freely. For Ravi, it was not just land, it was his safe world. One morning, as the sun rose and he stepped outside with a cup of tea, he noticed something strange stuck to his front gate. It was a thick envelope with bold letters on it. At first, he thought it might be a tax paper or a notice about some community event. But when he opened it, his heart sank. The letter was from the Homeowners Association, or HOA. The words on the paper were sharp and cold. They claimed that Ravi had broken several neighborhood rules. They said his fence was too high, his shed was not painted in the right color, and his dogs were too loud. Then, at the bottom, was the shocking line. The HOA had fined him $1 million. Ravi read the letter again and again, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. $1 million was more than he could ever imagine. He had never borrowed money, never lived in debt, and never caused trouble to anyone. How could they expect him to pay such a fine? It felt like a cruel joke, but the letter was official, with signatures and stamps. He walked back inside, still holding the paper. His friend Aman, who often visited him in the mornings, noticed the pale look on Ravi's face. Aman asked, "What happened? You look like you saw a ghost." Ravi handed him the letter. Aman read it and burst out in disbelief. "This is madness. They cannot do this. You built this place with your own hands. You are not hurting anyone." But the HOA was known for being strict. They wanted every house to look the same. They wanted every yard cut in a perfect shape, every shed painted in approved colors, every dog kept quiet. Ravi's land, with its fruit trees, wooden shed, and wide fence, was different. And difference was something the HOA did not like. Instead of fear, something else started to grow in Ravi's heart. It was anger, but not the wild kind. It was the quiet anger of a man who knew he was being wronged. He decided he would not bow down to such an unfair demand. That evening, he sat on his porch and looked at his land. The trees stood tall, their leaves dancing in the wind. The dogs played freely, chasing each other in joy. He thought about the many hours he had spent digging the soil, building the fence, and planting the seeds. He remembered the neighbors who once came to him for help when their roofs leaked or when their wells dried. He was not a troublemaker. He was a builder. The next day, Ravi went to the HOA office with the letter in his hand. The office was grand, with polished floors and large glass doors. Behind the desk sat a man in a neat suit, the head of the HOA, named Mr. Gill. His eyes were cold as he looked at Ravi. "You received our letter, I assume," Mr. Gill said. "Yes," Ravi replied calmly. "But this is not right. I am not paying such a fine. This is my land. I built my home with my own money. I harm no one." Mr. Gill gave a thin smile. "Rules are rules. If you live in this neighborhood, you must follow them. If you cannot, then you should leave." Ravi clenched his fist but kept his voice steady. "You may think you have power, but remember this. I did not take land from you. You came to me. This is my land, not yours. And if you keep pushing me, you will see what happens." The head of the HOA leaned back, amused. "We will see," he said coldly. Ravi left the office with his heart firm. He was no longer afraid. If the HOA wanted a fight, then he would not just defend himself. He would show them that no paper, no rule, and no fine could take away the land that a man built with his own sweat. As he walked back home, he looked again at his gate, the place where the letter had been pinned. This time he smiled. The battle had begun, and Ravi was ready. White heavy checkmark word count, 805. The news about Ravi's find spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered behind closed doors, and a few even avoided Ravi as if his fight with the HOA would bring trouble to them too. But there were also neighbors who quietly admired his courage. One of them was an old man named Hari who lived down the street. He had seen the town grow from open fields to rows of identical houses. Hari walked to Ravi's house one evening, leaning on his stick. "You are right not to pay," he said. "When I was young, land meant freedom. We built homes with our own ideas. Now these people want to make every house look the same, like birds trapped in one cage." Ravi offered him tea and listened carefully. The old man's words gave him strength. If the HOA thought they could scare him, they were wrong. He decided to prepare himself for whatever was coming. The very next day, HOA workers came to his gate with clipboards. They measured the fence, clicked photos of his shed, and noted the barking of his dogs as if they were collecting evidence for a crime. Ravi watched them from the porch. He did not shout or chase them away, but inside his mind, he promised himself that they would not win. Later that week, another letter arrived. This time it was a warning. If Ravi did not pay within 30 days, the HOA would take him to court. The paper also threatened that they could place a lien on his property, which meant they could claim control over his land. Ravi showed the letter to his friend Aman. Aman's face grew dark. "They are serious," he said. "But you have something they do not. You own this land outright. You never signed their papers. You are not like those who bought houses with HOA agreements. You were here before them. That means you have rights." This gave Ravi an idea. He began to search through his old documents. He found the original land deed, yellow with age but strong with ink. His father had signed it over to him many years ago. The paper clearly showed that the land was private, not bound by any association rules. The HOA had no true power over him. They were only trying to scare him with big words and heavy fines. Armed with this knowledge, Ravi started to plan. He could not fight them with anger alone. He needed to be smart. He needed to turn their own rules against them. A week later, the HOA called a community meeting in the town hall. Rows of chairs were filled with homeowners. At the front sat Mr. Gill, the head of the HOA, with his suit and smug smile. Beside him were other members, each holding thick folders. They began to speak about order and discipline. They spoke of how rules kept the neighborhood clean, safe, and beautiful. When it was Ravi's turn to speak, the hall grew quiet. He stood tall, holding the old deed in his hand. "You talk about order," Ravi said, "but what about justice? You talk about beauty, but what about freedom? This land you are trying to control does not belong to you. It is mine. Here is the proof, signed before any of your rules even existed." Gasps filled the hall as he held up the paper. The members of the HOA looked uneasy. Mr. Gill's smile faded for the first time. But he quickly stood and said, "Rules are still rules. If one person refuses, soon everyone will refuse. We cannot allow chaos." Ravi's voice grew stronger. "Chaos is when people are forced to live without choice. Chaos is when a man is fined $1 million for planting trees and keeping dogs. You may scare others, but you will not scare me. If you push harder, then I will push back harder." The hall erupted into murmurs. Some clapped quietly, others looked down in fear. The HOA ended the meeting quickly, but the seed of doubt had been planted in the community. For the first time, people saw that maybe the HOA was not as powerful as they claimed. That night, Ravi returned home and sat on his porch again. The dogs rested at his feet, the trees whispered in the evening wind, and the stars above shone brighter than usual. He felt a strange calm. He knew the fight was only beginning. The HOA would not give up easily. But he also knew something more important. He was not alone anymore. There were eyes watching, hearts waiting, and people quietly hoping that he would win. Ravi smiled faintly. They wanted to find him, to break him, to push him out. Instead, they had awakened a fire. He was ready for the storm. Days passed after the community meeting, but the air in the neighborhood was no longer the same. People looked at Ravi differently now. Some gave him nods of respect, some whispered about his courage, and others still avoided him, too afraid to stand against the HOA. But deep inside, everyone knew that Ravi had shaken the walls of power. The HOA did not stay quiet for long. One morning, Ravi woke to the sound of trucks outside his land. Workers in uniform stood near his fence, holding papers and tools. When Ravi walked out, one of them announced, "We are here to inspect and possibly remove structures that do not meet community standards." Ravi folded his arms. "This is my private land. You have no right to touch anything here." The worker hesitated, then showed him a paper signed by Mr. Gill. It was another notice, claiming that the shed on Ravi's land was an illegal structure. They demanded its removal. Ravi stood tall and replied calmly, "If you touch one brick of my shed, I will call the police and show them my land deed. You are trespassing." The workers looked at each other nervously. They were only following orders, but none of them wanted to get in legal trouble. After a short argument, they packed their tools and left. Ravi watched them drive away, his heart beating strong. He had won this round. But he knew the HOA would come again. That evening, Aman visited him. "You cannot fight this battle alone," Aman said. "They will keep sending papers, workers, and threats. You need support." Ravi nodded. "Support will come. People are watching. They are waiting for someone to stand firm. And I will stand." Sure enough, support did come. The old man Hari spread the word among the neighbors. Soon, a few people knocked on Ravi's door. They were tired of the HOA's endless rules too. One woman complained about being fined for hanging her laundry outside. Another man spoke about being forced to paint his house twice in 1 year because the color was not uniform. They all sat in Ravi's yard, sharing stories of unfair treatment. For the first time, they felt less alone. Ravi listened to them and said, "The HOA feeds on fear. They want you silent. But if we speak together, they cannot silence us all." This small gathering became the seed of a bigger plan. Ravi suggested forming a group of homeowners who would challenge the HOA's authority. They named it the Free Neighbors. It was not official, but it gave them strength. Meanwhile, Mr. Gill grew restless. At the next HOA board meeting, he slammed his hand on the table. "This man is dangerous. If we let him continue, others will rise against us. We must crush him before it spreads." Another board member spoke cautiously. "But he has proof. His deed shows the land is outside our reach. Maybe it is better to leave him alone." Gill's eyes turned cold. "No. If we let one man escape, everyone will try. We will take him to court. And if the court is slow, we will make his life so hard that he will leave on his own." The board agreed reluctantly. They knew Ravi was strong, but they also knew the HOA had money, lawyers, and endless resources. 1 week later, Ravi received another thick envelope. This time it was a legal summons. The HOA had filed a case against him, demanding control over his land. The paper said he must appear in court. Ravi read the notice carefully. Fear touched his heart, but it did not stay for long. He looked at his land, his home, and the faces of the neighbors who had begun to trust him. He could not back down now. At the same time, strange things began to happen. A complaint was filed about his dogs being dangerous. A fine was placed on his trash can for being out of alignment. And once, a HOA officer even tried to ticket his old bicycle for being left in plain view. It was clear they were trying to break him piece by piece. But instead of breaking, Ravi grew stronger. Each act of unfairness only added fuel to his fire. He wrote down every notice, every threat, and every fine. He collected them in a thick folder, ready to show the truth when the time came. One night, as he sat on his porch, Amon asked him, "Do you really think you can win against them? They have lawyers and money." Ravi looked at the stars above. A tree does not fall because the wind is strong. It falls when its roots are weak. My roots are deep. This land is my root. And I will not fall. The sound of crickets filled the air, and the dogs rested at his feet. In that moment, Ravi knew something clearly. This was no longer just about him. This was about every man and woman in the neighborhood who wanted to live free. The HOA had declared war, but Ravi was ready. The storm was growing, and soon the fight would leave his gate and enter the courtroom. The day of the hearing arrived. Ravi woke early, his heart steady though he knew the fight ahead would be tough. He wore simple clothes, the same kind he always wore, because he wanted to show the truth that he was just a man protecting his land, not someone playing power games. When he reached the courthouse, Aman and Hari were waiting for him. A few neighbors had also come to give quiet support. They nodded at him with hopeful eyes. Ravi gave a small smile, but he could feel the weight of their hopes on his shoulders. Inside the courtroom, the HOA had arrived in full force. Mr. Gill sat proudly at the front, dressed in his sharp suit, flanked by two lawyers with briefcases stuffed full of papers. They looked confident, as if the victory was already theirs. To them, Ravi was just one man against an entire system. The judge entered, and the hearing began. The HOA lawyers started speaking, their words smooth and heavy with legal terms. They claimed Ravi's land was part of the neighborhood. They claimed his shed, fence, and even his dogs were breaking community standards. They showed photos, reports, and signed letters. For a while, it seemed like the whole courtroom was buried under their arguments. Mr. Gill sat with a proud smile, as if he could already see Ravi's home being taken away. When it was Ravi's turn to speak, he stood slowly. He had no lawyer beside him, no thick folders of reports. All he carried was the old land deed and the folder of notices he had collected. He walked to the front and said in a calm voice, "I am not a rich man. I cannot hire lawyers to use big words. But I know one truth. This land was mine before the HOA existed. My father signed it to me. Here is the deed, clear and strong." He held the yellow paper high for the judge to see. The courtroom grew silent. Then he placed the folder of notices on the table. "These are the papers they sent me. Fines for my dogs. Fines for my trash can. Even fines for my bicycle. Tell me, Your Honor, does this sound like justice, or does it sound like harassment?" The judge picked up the notices, flipping through them with raised eyebrows. The pile was thick, almost comical in how petty it looked. People in the room began whispering. Even some who had come in support of the HOA looked uneasy. One of the HOA lawyers tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, the rules are important for order. Without rules, the community falls apart." Ravi turned to the lawyer and replied, "Rules are meant to guide, not to crush. $1 million fine for a simple man like me, is that guidance or punishment?" The judge leaned back, studying both sides. "Mr. Ravi, do you have witnesses to your claim that your land is outside the HOA's authority?" Hari, who had been sitting quietly, struggled to his feet. With his stick in hand, he spoke loudly, "I was here before the HOA too. I saw Ravi's father build that home with his own hands. The association came later. They never owned his land." Another neighbor stood as well, the woman who had been fined for her laundry. "They fined me for drying clothes in the sun. They fine us for everything. But Ravi is the only one brave enough to fight them. He is right. They are unfair." Soon, several voices joined in, speaking of their own fines and punishments. The judge raised a hand for silence but noted each testimony carefully. Mr. Gill's face grew red. He whispered angrily to his lawyers, but even they seemed nervous now. Their neat arguments were falling apart in the face of living truth. After a long silence, the judge spoke. "I will not make a final decision today. I need time to review this deed and the history of the property. But let me say this clearly: the HOA has no right to overstep beyond its limits. And if these fines are proven to be harassment, then the court will not allow them." The gavel struck, and the session ended. Outside the courtroom, the neighbors gathered around Ravi. Some clapped his back, others shook his hand. For the first time, people were openly standing with him. Aman grinned. "You shook them today. Did you see Gill's face? He looked like someone pulled the ground from under him." Ravi smiled faintly but stayed calm. This was only the first step. They will not give up. They will come harder next time. We must be ready. That evening, Ravi sat on his porch once more. The sunset painted the sky in deep orange, and his dogs lay beside him. He felt both tired and strong. He knew the battle was far from over. The HOA had money and power, and they would not accept defeat easily. But something had changed today. It was no longer just Ravi against the HOA. Now the community had begun to see the truth. Now the walls of fear had cracks in them. And cracks, Ravi knew, always grow until the wall falls. The courtroom hearing had shaken the HOA. For the first time, their power had been questioned in front of a judge and a crowd of homeowners. Mr. Gill, who had always walked with pride, now carried a heavy anger in his eyes. He had promised the board that he would crush Ravi, and yet the man had stood tall, turning the people against them. The HOA board gathered in a private meeting soon after. "We cannot let this man win," Gill said sharply. "If he defeats us, others will rise. Our rules will lose meaning." One of the members whispered, "But the judge may not side with us. His deed is old and clear. If the court declares his land free, we cannot control him." Gill's face tightened. "Then we will not wait for court. We will make his life so miserable that he will leave on his own. If the law cannot silence him, pressure will." From that day, Ravi's troubles grew. Every morning brought a new letter on his gate. One accused him of allowing wild growth in his yard because his trees were taller than approved height. Another claimed his porch light was too bright and disturbed neighbors. Then came a notice that his dogs had been seen without leashes, even though they never left his yard. But Ravi did not bend. Instead, he collected every paper and placed it in his growing folder. "Let them write," he told Aman. "The thicker this folder becomes, the heavier it will fall on them." The HOA did more than letters. Workers began circling his land, taking pictures at odd hours. Once, someone dumped trash near his fence and then reported him for having garbage. Another time, his water supply was mysteriously cut off for a full day, though no one admitted responsibility. Yet Ravi did not lose his calm. Each challenge only made his spirit stronger. His neighbors saw his patience and his quiet strength. Some who had been afraid began to join his side. The Free Neighbors group grew larger. They met secretly in Ravi's yard, under the shade of his trees, sharing ideas on how to resist. "We have lived in fear too long," one man said. "We pay fees, we follow endless rules, and yet they never stop fining us. Enough is enough." Ravi listened, then spoke with steady voice. "They strike at me because I stood up. But remember, this fight is not mine alone. If we are together, they cannot touch us. The HOA feeds on silence. Let us break that silence." The neighbors agreed. Some began writing their own complaints against the HOA. Others gathered old letters and notices, ready to use them as proof of unfair treatment. For the first time, the community was rising. But Gill was clever too. He sensed the change and decided to strike harder. One evening, Ravi received a final warning letter. It declared that the HOA board had voted to place a lien on his property. If the court did not side with them, they would still claim his land as part of community maintenance. Aman read the letter aloud and cursed under his breath. They are desperate now. They know they are losing, so they are trying to scare you into giving up. Ravi's eyes burned with determination. They are trying to play power. But they forget one truth. This is my land. And if they want to fight me for it, then I will take the fight further than they ever imagined. The next morning, Ravi went to the town's records office. With the help of a clerk, he gathered every old map and legal document about his land. He found clear proof that the HOA's boundary never included his property. It was a strong shield, but Ravi wanted more than defense. He wanted to strike back. He began to study the HOA itself. With the help of Aman and Hari, he looked into how the HOA was formed, how they used the money collected from fees, and how they punished homeowners unfairly. The deeper they searched, the more cracks they found. Money spent without record. Fines collected without explanation. Rules changed without proper votes. This is it, Ravi said one evening as they sat under his porch light. They think they can bury me with papers. But papers can bury them too. If we bring this truth forward, they will fall. Hari smiled, his eyes shining with pride. Your father would be proud of you, boy. You are fighting not just for yourself, but for all of us. But Gil was not sitting idle. He sensed that something was brewing. He began to send men to Ravi's yard at night, hoping to catch him breaking some rule. Once, they even tried to break a part of his fence and blame him for damage. But each time, Ravi was ready. He kept watch, he kept records, and he refused to be tricked. The storm between Ravi and the HOA grew heavier with each passing day. The court case was still moving slowly, but the battle outside the court had already become a war. Letters, threats, meetings, and secret gatherings filled the days. One night, as the moon shone bright and the air was still, Ravi stood in his yard and looked at his land. His dogs rested quietly, the trees swayed in the soft wind, and the stars above seemed to whisper courage. He felt the weight of the fight, but he also felt the strength of his roots. They want to break me, he whispered to himself. But I will not break. They want to own my land. Instead, I will show them what it means to lose power. The next stage of the battle was coming, and Ravi was ready to strike back harder than ever. The days of silence were gone. The whole neighborhood now buzzed with talk about Ravi and the HOA. Some people feared the fight would bring trouble, but many more quietly cheered him on. They had lived under the weight of endless rules for too long. Ravi had become the voice they wished they had. One morning, Ravi walked into the community hall carrying two heavy folders. One was his own, filled with every letter, every fine, and every false claim the HOA had thrown at him. The other was thicker, filled with documents he and Aman had gathered about the HOA's actions. Misused funds, hidden expenses, rules passed without votes, everything was there. The HOA board had called for another meeting. The hall was packed. Homeowners sat in rows, their faces serious and expectant. At the front, Mr. Gill stood with his usual confidence, though there was a sharpness in his eyes that betrayed unease. Order, Gill called out. We are here today to address continued violations by Mr. Ravi and the threat his refusal poses to our community standards. He began listing supposed violations again: his fence, his shed, his dogs. The same tired list, dressed in strong words. Some neighbors nodded nervously, but most sat still, waiting to hear Ravi's reply. When Gill finished, Ravi stood. He carried the two folders to the front and placed them on the table. His voice was calm but carried across the room. Every letter you sent me is here. Every fine, every threat, every notice. Do you see how thick this folder is? This is what the HOA calls order. But I call it harassment. He opened the second folder and spread the papers out. And here is what I found about you. Money collected from neighbors for maintenance but never explained. Rules changed without votes. Fines used as tools of fear, not fairness. You talk about standards, but where are your standards? The room erupted in murmurs. People leaned forward, whispering to each other. Some began to clap quietly. Gil's face darkened. "This is nonsense," Gil snapped. "These are private documents. You have no right to gather them." Ravi looked him in the eye. "When you use power against people, people have the right to know how you use it. You call my land a violation, but your greed is the true violation." The words struck deep. Many in the hall rose from their seats, speaking openly now. One man shouted, "Yes, I was fined for planting flowers outside my window." Another woman cried out, "They charged me 3 times for painting my fence. Where did that money go?" Gil tried to shout over them, but the voices grew louder. The power that once kept everyone silent was breaking apart. Finally, the judge who was handling Ravi's court case had also sent a representative to observe the meeting. That man, standing quietly in the back, now stepped forward. "I will be reporting what I have seen today," he said firmly. "This is not order. This is abuse of authority. The court will take this into account." Gil's hands trembled slightly. He tried to gather his papers, but the homeowners were no longer listening to him. They were listening to Ravi. The meeting ended in chaos, but not for Ravi. For the first time, the HOA stood weaker than ever before. People left the hall whispering about forming a new leadership, one that actually listened to them. That night, Ravi sat on his porch as Aman and Hari joined him. Aman laughed with relief. "You shook them to the core today. Did you see Gil's face? He looked like a man sinking in quicksand." Hari nodded slowly. "But be careful, boy. A cornered wolf is dangerous. They may try something desperate now." Ravi agreed. "Yes, they will strike harder. But their grip is slipping. They built their power on fear, and now fear is leaving. Without fear, they are nothing." The following week proved Hari's warning true. HOA officers arrived again, this time with trucks and workers. They claimed they were there to enforce emergency community action. They tried to step onto Ravi's land to take down his shed. But this time, Ravi was ready. When they reached his gate, he stood with his deed in hand and a group of neighbors behind him. Aman, Hari, and others formed a wall. The workers looked unsure. They had never faced resistance before. "You have no right here," Ravi declared. "This is my land. Step inside, and you are trespassers. We will call the police." The workers hesitated. Some muttered quietly, looking back at the officers. Finally, under the watch of dozens of neighbors, they retreated. The trucks left in silence. That moment marked a turning point. The neighbors cheered, clapping Ravi on the back. For the first time, they had stood together openly, not in secret. The HOA's power was no longer unquestioned. But Gil was not finished. Later that night, he called an emergency meeting with the board. His voice was sharp with anger. "He is turning them against us. If we do not crush him now, we are finished. We must take full legal action. No delays." The board members looked uneasy. Some had begun to fear Ravi's growing influence. But Gil forced them to agree. They would push the court case forward with all their strength. Meanwhile, Ravi sat under the stars, his dogs curled at his feet, listening to the wind in the trees. He knew the final battle was coming soon. The court would decide, and everything would rest on that judgment. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "They tried to bury me with fines, but instead they planted me like a seed. Now I am growing stronger." The storm was almost at its peak. The day of the final court hearing arrived. The town seemed unusually quiet, as if everyone knew something important was about to happen. Ravi woke before sunrise, his heart steady. He had faced threats, letters, fines, and harassment for months, but today everything would be decided. He dressed simply, carrying his folders filled with evidence. Aman and Hari joined him, along with a few neighbors who had been supporting him quietly. The courthouse steps were crowded with people curious to see the outcome. Some were neighbors, others came to watch the famous battle between Ravi and the HOA. Inside the courtroom, Mr. Gill and the HOA board sat confidently, but there was tension in the air. They had seen their power crumble over the past weeks, yet they hoped the court would restore it. Ravi, on the other hand, felt calm. He had the law, the truth, and the support of the people on his side. The judge entered and took his seat. His eyes scanned the room, noting the crowd and the stacks of papers on both sides. He spoke firmly. "We are here to review the case regarding Mr. Ravi and the Homeowners Association. Both parties will have their chance to speak." The HOA lawyers started first, listing the same complaints about fences, sheds, and pets. They claimed Ravi had violated community rules and demanded the court enforce fines and restrictions. When Ravi stood, the courtroom grew silent. He did not speak with anger. Instead, he calmly presented the original land deed, showing clearly that his property was private and not bound by the HOA rules. He laid out all the notices, letters, and fines the HOA had sent him, highlighting how they had tried to intimidate him and the neighbors. "This is not a man violating rules," Ravi said softly. "This is a man defending his home from unfair treatment. This is a man standing for the rights of anyone who lives under fear of false fines. The HOA may have rules, but they are not above the law. And the law protects us from harassment." The judge listened carefully, flipping through each document. Then, neighbors were called to testify. They spoke one by one about fines, letters, and punishments that made no sense. Some had been fined for planting flowers. Others had been penalized for simple repairs. Each testimony showed a pattern of unfair treatment. Even Mr. Gill struggled to respond. His lawyers tried to explain, but the evidence was overwhelming. It was no longer just Ravi against the HOA. It was Ravi and the truth against years of abuse of power. After hours of arguments, the judge leaned back and spoke. "I have reviewed all evidence and testimony. It is clear that Mr. Ravi's property is private and outside the authority of the Homeowners Association. Furthermore, the HOA has acted beyond its limits, sending fines and threats without legal justification. Therefore, the HOA has no right to enforce rules, fines, or liens on Mr. Ravi's land." The courtroom gasped. Ravi felt a wave of relief and joy. Mr. Gill's face was pale, his confidence shattered. The judge continued. "Moreover, the HOA is hereby ordered to cease any harassment or enforcement actions against Mr. Ravi immediately. Any further attempt will be considered unlawful and may result in penalties to the association." The crowd in the courtroom erupted in applause. Neighbors cheered and clapped, some even standing to salute Ravi. Aman clapped him on the back, smiling widely. Hari's eyes glistened as he said, "You did it, boy. You protected more than your land. You protected all of us." Ravi nodded, feeling a calm pride. "This was never just about me," he said. "It was about fairness, freedom, and standing up for what is right. Today, we showed that courage and truth can defeat fear and false power." Outside the courthouse, neighbors gathered around Ravi. They celebrated quietly, not with loud parties, but with warm smiles and hugs. Some had already begun planning to hold meetings to create a new neighborhood council that respected everyone's rights. Mr. Gill left the courthouse silently, his power broken. He had underestimated one man's determination and the strength of community. His days of controlling neighbors through fear were over. Back on his land, Ravi stood on his porch, looking at his trees, his shed, and his two dogs running freely. The sun was setting, casting a golden light across his yard. It was peaceful, but more importantly, it was free. Aman joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "You fought like a lion," he said. "I thought the HOA could never be stopped." Ravi smiled and shook his head. "They thought power was enough. But truth, courage, and support from neighbors can topple even the strongest walls. Remember, it is not enough to fight alone. We need each other." Hari, leaning on his stick, nodded in agreement. "You turned fear into strength, boy. Your father would be proud. And the neighborhood will remember this day for a long time." That evening, as the stars appeared above and the wind whispered through the trees, Ravi felt a deep peace. The battle was over, and victory belonged not just to him, but to everyone who had believed in fairness. The HOA had tried to control his land with threats and fines, but Ravi had protected it with courage, knowledge, and unity. From that day forward, his land remained free, a symbol of resistance, justice, and the power of standing firm. And so, Ravi's home at the edge of the neighborhood became more than a house. It became a place where truth, justice, and courage would always be remembered.